Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm going to go ahead and invite up Kathleen to introduce our next topic. Kathleen, you want to turn on your camera and mic, and then we will get this going.
Hello, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the networking session. Our next session is going to be a perspective from the demand side, those that are actively looking at biochar-based removal credits. And our moderator is none other than James McPhail, the CEO of Sequest in the UK. And many of you will also know James, I hope. He's been in the biochar industry longer than I have. And we worked together in COP a few weeks ago, and I twisted his arm, and he will be moderating the next panel. So, James, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. This is session 2B, but it was almost not to be, as the international corporations who've been very public regarding their carbon removal activities were invited to be part of this and declined. But if they didn't want to participate, it's probably our gain, because what we have is an even better lineup coming up with our speakers, some of whom act as their advisors. So each of today's speakers are going to briefly introduce their companies and what they do, and then we'll have a broad-ranging series of questions to go through. And I invite you all to participate using the Q&A session, and then we'll, as long as they're relevant topics, we'll go through those after everyone's introduced what they're doing. And so with that, I'm going to hand over to Andrea, if you'd like to go first, and then we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Hello to everyone. I will just screen. Sorry. Yes, super. Hello to everyone. A little bit of our clients and what we are doing. We are project developers, so we develop high-quality emission reduction projects and integrate them into sustainability strategies with our clients to achieve their net zero targets. So we typically get involved in projects as participants, the development phase, where we can add our expertise in project certification and the participation of the associated carbon credits. We are based in Germany, in Bonn, but we have other places, Spain, America, where we have a strong network there. Our current portfolio is composed mainly of natural climate projects. That's our main expertise. But then we started our biochar journey because we identified within our projects that mainly are developed in developing countries, that there is a vast accumulation of residues. So we have, for example, cocoa, coffee, forestry, value chain, where there was not real waste management rather than just combustion of the residues, for example. So we wanted to offer solutions to different project developers to access and to support them to mobilization of the climate finance to secure a long-term carbon sink through the production of biochar, in this case, and application of biochar at the end. And we are developing we are part of the consortium developing the BCS biochar methodology that was explained in the So for us, biochar is the perfect mix between also the monitoring system also in place, as was explained in the panel before. And we need carbon removals action at this point to limit the global warming, but especially we need robust biochar carbon projects that are key to achieve climate commitments, but at both at governmental, but at also at corporate level. Currently, also the corporates, so the corporations played an important role mobilizing resources within the voluntary carbon market, especially because they are the ones who demand and invest and also purchase high-quality carbon dioxide removal credits. So they are sending an important demand signal to developers, to investors, and to other buyers. But the supply is still quite low to cope with the high demand volumes. So I just wanted to briefly explain a little bit what is our experience on the market, because we see that the voluntary carbon market is exploding, but that also doesn't mean that the end buyer in this case will buy any type of carbon. So I would like to summarize some of our learning in this biochar journey that we have started. So first, we have that the end buyers are focused on that they are seeking legitimization, for example, on their climate neutrality and also on how to achieve their net zero targets. Some end buyers do not completely understand the market, and sometimes it's just one person who is in charge of the compensation target of the company and selecting the carbon portfolio without really understanding the methodology and the terminology behind it. So end trust on the labels and on the standard certification of the project. To tackle this, at For Lions, we invest in educate and the end buyer with clear communication based on science, but also explaining the quality carbon criteria and the project co-benefits. Also, scalability and price. So corporates have a small to large requirement for carbon credits depending on their carbon footprints. And sometimes, for example, they are requests from thousands of tons of CO2 removals, but how much of biochar carbon credits can actually supply the demand of the corporates? Maybe will be around 3 to 5% of the complete carbon portfolio. And also, usually the corporates have a defined budget that they need to allocate for the carbon prices or to buy the carbon credits, for example. So that means that they have a determined budget for a determined fiscal year at the same point, at the same year. So, for example, in a mixed portfolio, if we offer other nature-based projects, the end buyer will see prices between 15, 20 euros, for example, for a reforestation projects, and then they will see like the different price regimes with the biochar carbon credits around 100 or 150 euros. So the end buyer understands that price difference, and this is how we also invest and communicate clearly what is behind this price difference that is also based on the technology used to produce biochar, for example. Another key point that we identify is on the permanence and the additionality. So the element of permanence is especially highlighted in removals. The end buyer sometimes don't understand what is the logic behind how permanence is communicated. There are some biochar projects that communicate 100 years permanence, 400, 1,000 years permanence. And what is the difference from a corporate point of view is they just don't get it, for example. So at this point, we are also thinking internally, like if this call for a standardization on the permanence for biochar projects, market will benefit from a robust, transparent, and comparable statements. And then we also identify the right type of partner for the carbon dioxide. Also support the biochar carbon market because corporates with a value change, like for example, are more keen to invest and to understand a biochar project that other ones who are not really related to how biochar or the waste biomass can be utilized for biochar production. So this also brings me like then how we, and this is my slide, how can we bring different biochar projects into the market? First, the projects needs funding. So in this case, we at For Lions can support with early investment, for example, to cover the project cost and to take off the project at the earliest stage. So what we do is through our shareholder, incorporating the project into our portfolio, we can present it to the corporates and we can mobilize the investment needed to secure the carbon inventory. So it will be like a transactions between the project developer, in this case, and the corporate. We also support on the project development for the carbon certification, in this case, just following the high quality carbon standards and criteria, just as we mentioned. We also see differentiation, for example, when, as I explained, between the different nature-based projects and biochar projects. And then we need a clear education for the final end buyer, just to try to simplify all this terminology that we, that for the ones who are actually on the project is so used to, but we need to quite simplify it. And so at the end, we can also offer offtakes, for example, in the case that we can secure the buying of the carbon credits that the project will produce in the future, which also brings security to the project, to the biochar producers. Yes, this is just a pipeline of the projects that we have. Currently, for example, I just wanted to show that on Europe, or for example, in the United States, but it's also taking off in the developing countries as well. Thank you very much. James,
Hey, thank you, Andrea. Appreciate that. Lewis, do you mind killing your camera until it's your turn to talk? You're up last on this panel, just so you know. Thank you. Thank you, that's great. And now off to Eftimia from Compensate. If you'd like to take your slides away, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. If you can just confirm you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Thanks. So hello everyone, my name is Eftimia Salo and I'm the head of carbon projects at Compensate. So really briefly about Compensate, we're a Finnish-based non-profit and we provide companies and individuals access to high quality carbon capture to compensate their emissions. And here are 4 key things that makes us quite different from the other offset providers on the market. The first one is that we have a scientific advisory panel with which help we are creating evaluation criteria. At the moment we have for forest-based projects, mostly conservation and reforestation. And with the help of this criteria, we select each project which enters the portfolio, and the criteria go beyond the existing standards. So we are much more critical. And 9 out of 10 projects fail. So we have evaluated more than 100 projects and less than 10 have entered the portfolio. And then we apply overcompensation, which in practice means that we do not believe that 1 carbon credit actually corresponds to 1 ton of CO2. Since there are many uncertainties, how carbon is calculated, how baselines are set. So with the help of the criteria, we evaluate the real climate impact of 1 credit, and then we buy more just to ensure 1 ton real impact. But then we don't stop there, because having 1 ton real impact just ensures carbon neutrality. But since there is too much CO2 in the atmosphere, we need to actually take more than a product or a service causes. And that's why we buy more carbon credits. It is inbuilt in our price per ton, so we charge a bit higher than the current market price. It is 28 euros per ton, and for this money we buy as many carbon credits as we can. And finally, we are a non-profit with full transparency, so unlike other actors, we don't take any cuts from the compensation payments, and we direct 100% in full towards the projects. We try to work exclusively with project developers to make sure that the money reaches the project and the people on the ground. And we also disclose our bank statement and purchase certificates on our website. And the voluntary carbon market just reached 1 billion this year, and it is expected to grow 10 to 40 billion in 2030. And growth in demand is also causing price increase, and we're expected to see $20 to $50 per ton of CO2, and that will reach even $100 by 2050. And there is greater investment in more costly carbon removal projects. And that's just an example of how so far the nature-based projects have been much lower priced than permanent carbon removals like biochar, but now we see that gap is shrinking. And these are some of the demand drivers that I have seen for permanent carbon removals. So there is the newly published SBTi net zero standard, where companies need to reduce 90 to 95% of their emissions and compensate the remaining emissions with permanent carbon removals. The second one is the Oxford Principles for Net Zero Aligned Carbon Offsetting, where also it is encouraged to increase the amount of permanent carbon removals, just to indicate the demand so this can develop in the years to come. And finally, I have seen criticism of offsetting fossil emissions with temporary carbon storage in living ecosystems, since CO2 emissions which are emitted, they stay 300 to 1,000 years in the atmosphere. And if you protect the forest or plant a tree, they will be sequestering as long as the trees are standing. And maybe it's 50, maybe it's 100 years, but definitely it's not as long as the fossil fuel CO2 emissions. And what else I have been seeing is something which is beyond offsetting with biochar, the so-called insetting or reducing emissions in companies' own supply chain. That provides one option for companies to comply with the SBTi net zero standard, reducing their own emissions. And this biochar provides various opportunities, especially for companies in the agriculture and food industries. So biochar is capturing nutrients when applied to animal bedding, prevents leaching of nutrients when applied to soil. Then it mitigates methane emissions by treating manure and slurry. It reduces methane emissions and is enriching the biochar when it's fed to animals, and also can be used as natural fertilizer. And here is about our ongoing work on biochar. So we have been a buyer of biochar credits for the past year and a half as part of our 20% innovative carbon capture portfolio. However, we have been, since biochar is emerging technology and we don't understand it that well, we have been not able to evaluate it as well as the well-known forest-based projects. So we have been buying very little volumes. And now we just launched a project supported by FedEx Express Europe on developing biochar evaluation criteria. So similarly to the criteria we have for the forest-based projects, the idea here is to get a better understanding of biochar and the sustainability of production, pyrolysis, feedstock, and application. And with the help of this criteria to be able to distinguish the better projects. And that will add also a lot of clarity for the buyers, our clients, since biochar is a completely new area and it's highly technical. So buyers really need to understand this better. And here is what's next. So Compensate is looking forward to also work in other areas, for example, which hasn't been researched so far. And these are the so-called co-benefits of biochar application to soil. And these benefits at the moment are unaccounted for. So biochar credits are traded on the mass of biochar, and all the co-benefits, water retention, nutrients, and enriching soils, this is left out. So we are partnering with leading biochar scientists and looking for ways how we can enhance the science on that front. And then scaling the biochar market by creating demand for biochar through insetting. So we are actively exploring if there are companies who are interested in having experiments and pilot projects where we can monitor how emissions are reduced on site, for example, at a farm level. And finally, biochar was featured in the preliminary study for the EU-wide carbon removal certificate. And I really hope to see there as one of the carbon removal methods which are going to be approved, and then also seeing what methodology they will apply and so on. But I think that's in brief. Thank you so much, and looking forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Eftimia. That was great. Without further ado, Teresa, if you'd like to get your slides ready and come up next.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Let me share my slides. Oops. Hopefully that is working now. Can everyone see that? Okay, my name is Teresa Lang. I'm the Senior Sourcing Manager for North America at South Pole. So a little bit first about South Pole, and then I'll talk a little bit more about what I do. So South Pole is a global sustainability solutions provider. We're a 15-year-old company headquartered in Switzerland. I represent our North American US office. We have 20 offices at this point with over 600 employees working in a range of elements of the sustainability world. We are the largest developer of emission reduction and avoidance projects globally, as well as carbon removal projects. Just a quick showing you all of our different offices around the world, as well as a selection of our climate action projects. So a little bit about our work. We definitely have gotten engaged in biochar more recently, but we are a longstanding project developer with over 1,000 carbon emission reduction projects developed in over 50 countries. To date, that is over 170 million metric tons of carbon dioxide reduced. In forestry, it amounts to 2 million hectares of forest protected, 140,000 gigawatt hours of renewable energy generated, and so on. To speak a little bit more about how we work in the carbon offsets market in particular, you can really think of us as an end-to-end solution provider. So we not only focus on developing and generating the carbon offsets, but we also have a large network of buyers, over 1,000 active clients currently, and counting. That number does continue to grow, as well as our carbon removal purchase facility, which I'll speak to momentarily. We have over 50 sustainability professionals around 5 continents working with those clients. On the technical side of things, we have been involved in developing the VCS carbon offset protocol, which is mentioned both earlier with our partners, 4 Alliance, who we're working on that protocol with for the VCS standard. We also are a technical working group member for the Climate Action Reserves protocol development process. In addition to that technical work, we are also beginning to invest directly into biochar projects. So you can look to us as providing financial support for your projects, both in the form of long-term offtake purchase agreements, as well as upfront investments, both paying for those credits in advance, as well as in some cases equity investments. We are starting to look at investments in Europe and Africa. Work has already begun on those, and we're really looking forward to making our first investments in North America. I won't go too much into detail on that investment side of things today. I hope you're able to join the first session tomorrow, where I will be speaking a little bit more about our work in that space. But our ambition really is to invest many millions into biochar removal projects over the next year. And then I wanted to speak a little bit about the expansion of the voluntary market. I think that's something that really is meant to be covered and thought it would be helpful to speak to. I know the past speaker did touch on it, but really this shows the progression of the voluntary market up until now. So back in 2008, you can see it was quite small. This diagram shows up until the year 2020, with the voluntary carbon market really almost doubling in size since 2018 to 2020. However, the demand in the voluntary market continues to soar. So this shows a breakdown of the different project types to date and how those projects have really, the demand for those projects have continued to grow. You'll notice that technical carbon removals, which is where we would count biochar carbon credits or carbon removals, isn't even on this diagram yet. That's because really this is a new project type. So the closest thing to that, you can see the dark blue line towards the bottom, the smaller amounts. Those are removals in nature-based solutions, so such things as tree planting projects or soil carbon projects. That is starting to grow, and we expect that to continue to grow. And of course, technical removals and biochar credits, we do expect to grow along with that. And just a quick look at some of the projections for that future demand. You can see here in 2019, the voluntary carbon market was 104 million tons of CO2 and about 280 million euros. Already in 2020, 413 million euros, and in 2021, 874 million euros. These are not South Pole's numbers. We took them from a number of our partners, and those two Those two resources that you see at the bottom of my screen are really highly recommended, really great resources to go to if you want more information on kind of that growing demand. You'll also see on the right side of the screen really how much we expect the voluntary carbon market to continue growing over time. So South Pole really is working in supporting this growth in all elements of the market. We're really interested in meeting a number of biochar producers who are interested in working with us on generating credits. I focus on the North American market and carbon credit development, but we definitely are interested in speaking to everyone that's at this conference who might be interested in talking to us. I'm happy to put you in touch with my colleagues in other regions as well. And with that, I will pass it back over to the moderator.
Hey, thank you very much. So next up, Jacob, if you want to get your slides ready. I appreciate that, Teresa, and Jacob, over to you.
Sure. Just a moment. Good. So, hi everyone. Thanks for your attention. My name is Jacob Bourgeois. I'm a project development manager at Climate Partner. Similar to South Pole, is one of the many companies out there that's really more consumer facing. I would say in this market is on the project development side, although we engage in that as well. So I'll just give you a brief introduction to the company. Really kind of how we engage with our clients, some of the things that might need to be kept in mind when it comes to the demand side for these credits, how it would fit in within overall portfolios, and how we really try to engage with biochar projects, at least up until now. I'll start there. So, Climate Partner. I'm actually from the United States, but this is a German-based company, so it's headquartered in Munich. That's where I am. At the moment, it's been around for about 15 years or so. Really, again, very focused on the consumer side of especially the voluntary carbon market, as opposed to the demand side, like some of the other speakers. So we've been growing quite rapidly over the past several years. We have more than 300 employees, around 4,000 corporate customers, ranging from the very small to the very large, across a variety of industries in more than 35 countries. Really, our unique selling point, I think that's a little bit different from some of our competitors, is that we see ourselves in some ways more like a software company. So we offer the software as a service package to our clients, not exclusively, although that composes a large portion of our overall services within this industry. The kind of, I guess, infrastructure behind the software is an automated process for consumers to calculate their carbon footprints. So we kind of provide a software infrastructure to more or less automate that process for customers as they sell product. Grams of CO2 are calculated on an ongoing basis, summed up for the consumers, for the customers rather. And then we provide a labeling service for products that can actually be visible to the end consumers who would be buying these products. There's a QR code. Consumers see which projects are being supported, what the company is doing to reduce its emissions in-house, and kind of describes in great detail the climate neutral journey that the customer is on. So this is a way to kind of engage even the final consumers a little bit more than some other of our competitors do when it comes to carbon neutrality. So it's kind of a unique, I would say, approach that we do. It's quite popular in Germany. In here, you might have seen our label. But we're expanding globally at the moment as well, opening lots of offices recently in France, Scandinavia, the UK, Italy, and most recently the United States. So that's what most of the company does. What I do as I work in the carbon offsetting and green energy services department, that's specifically the branch of the company that is in charge of sourcing carbon credits to put together these portfolios. That is the backup for our services, and also in developing and investing in new projects. And just really quick, just to give you an idea of who we usually are speaking to when it comes to the demand side of the equation. Again, more than 4,000 corporate customers, very wide variety of consumers here, anything from kind of large retail stores, food, industrial players, down to the very small kind of service-oriented companies, cosmetics, and of course, many of the big players in logistics and heavy manufacturing as well. So when we put together for end consumers, really what we're doing in the end is kind of providing a sampling of what's available out there in the carbon market. You've probably been hearing examples of this throughout the conference so far, but just to give kind of a very basic overview of how this usually looks, usually those credits are coming from one of three general classes of project intervention types. That would be kind of the green energy category. So you can think of wind farms, hydropower, solar energy, geothermal energy, and so on and so forth. There would be the nature-based solutions class of products. So any kind of forestry intervention, this would be including removals and non-removal intervention types. So you can think of the classic red forest conservation projects as an avoided emissions solution, whereas afforestation, reforestation would be a removals project type, and others are mixed. Biochar would largely fit into the removals category, of course. And then we have the community development projects, which would be things like clean cook stoves, drinking water, household biogas, and other kind of small scale community development programs. And then in addition to this category, of course, we have kind of other more newer, innovative style projects. These would be things like the CCS technologies, things like biochar, which are on the horizon, and BECCS and so on and so forth. Of course, as has been mentioned several times already, there's, of course, a work on developing methodologies for these interventions, but because of the high price point, and also because these are still in development, methodologically speaking, for the voluntary carbon market, they still tend to be quite a niche product within the overall portfolio that we usually offer. So I guess just to give an idea, I think Teresa gives a good overview of where the carbon market has been going over the past several years, but usually when we're looking at these other project classes, just to give kind of a realistic assessment of the kind of the prices involved, all of them, I would say, would have been within the single digits cost-wise from a dollar perspective up until just a year or two ago. Nature-based solutions kind of on the high end of that, green energy solutions on the low end of that, but all quite cheap, which would be, quite different compared to the new innovative project types that you see out there. Of course, those are all going up. Demand is really outstripping supply in the market at the moment. So you see, of course, prices going up across all project classes. Nature-based solutions certainly in most cases are in the double-digit figures now when it comes to price, but still, I would say far, far below what would be expected typically for interventions like biochar or DAC or BECCS. So I think the challenge we're facing when providing portfolios to our end clients is, on the one hand, interested in newer solutions, but then on the one hand, when they see the volumes involved, which are quite small in most cases for these new technological innovations, and then also the price point, it can be a hard sell, I would say, unless the client is specifically looking for that or willing to engage in a kind of a special financial opportunity there. So just to give context again to the kind of the overall volumes that usually we're experiencing, our company alone this year has supplied around 10 million offsets to our clients. And usually when we're talking to biochar project developers, CCS and so on, I think we all know the volumes are quite a bit smaller than that. So, meeting the demand is a real challenge at this point, I would say. And just one way we do get around this, and I think maybe something that some of you might be interested in, on the one hand, because of the price issue, and on the other, because of the volume and certification issue, is that we actually provide double project solutions within our standard portfolio. So the map here gives you an idea of the kinds of projects that we usually support and the countries where these are located. In the case of biochar or other project intervention types where certification might not be possible, for example, afforestation, reforestation in Europe typically isn't a kind of product you can buy in the voluntary carbon market, or biochar, for example, these can be packaged as what we call double product projects. So essentially, we would take an existing carbon offset project, afforestation, reforestation project from Uganda, or a renewable project from Latin America, and we would package this with a sponsored donation to a project intervention that wouldn't be covered by certification. So in the case of biochar, we have the Warm Heart Foundation that we work with in Thailand. Any company that wishes to support biochar or this specific biochar intervention would purchase essentially a ton of carbon, which would be backed up by an AR project in Uganda. And then for each ton committed to, they would also give an extra financial contribution to the Warm Heart Foundation to produce 10 kilograms of biochar in addition to the ton offset through the existing project. So, you know, obviously that's a small fraction of a ton. It's a way of basically kind of giving micro credits to these companies, but it's at least a way of engaging in the absence of certification and a way to kind of get around the pricing issue for some of these projects. So that's something we do there and is one possible solution at the moment to kind of address this double issue that I was talking about.
Thank you, Jacob. Brilliant. Cheers.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And our last speaker, Lewis, if you have your slides ready, or you're ready to come on camera.
Hi there, and hopefully you can hear me okay. I don't have any slides. I wanted really just to share our view of these markets, the voluntary carbon markets and biochar. Just a quick introduction to who we are. So I work for Redshore Advisors, and we're a company dedicated to helping companies, governments, anyone to understand and ultimately to access carbon markets globally. And yeah, we've been looking at the emissions trading schemes initially when we set up in 2014, but increasingly people have lots and lots of questions around the voluntary carbon markets, and so we have product that helps people understand that and help them make better decisions. And just by way of a further bit of background, and I started Redshore Advisors in 2014, but before that, I ran Barclays Capital's environmental markets business that I started back in 2004, and I ran that for 10 years. And so our background is very much from a trading perspective, you know, what makes markets work, and we don't speculate at all at Redshore Advisors, but we take that experience and try and apply it to the markets that we find, and indeed to give advantage or at least advice to the customers that we speak to. And what's missing from the biochar carbon credit market is somewhere where there are large, dependable numbers of willing buyers that are prepared to pay the high price that biochar requires. It's debatable exactly where the point is between what it requires and what is demanded, given there's such a shortage of supply, and Hannes in the previous session referenced that. But undoubtedly, the cost of producing reliable carbon removals from biochar is high. And in theory, compliance markets can provide that marketplace, and that would create a huge amount of demand. For example, if biochar derived carbon credits could be used in the EU emissions trading scheme that today hit another all-time high of 90 euros, which is $102. If they could be used there, then that would create a fantastic market opportunity, but they're not allowed, right? And indeed, other compliance-based carbon markets don't have prices anywhere near that in the EU ETS. So unfortunately, those compliance markets aren't the home that biochar carbon credits are looking for, or at least the source of demand, I should say. But what we mustn't forget is that in 2050, there can't be any carbon reductions or carbon avoidances. In 2050, when we're supposed to be hitting net zero, every carbon emission that there is remaining at that point needs to be offset by a long-lived removal. And that is obviously biochar's opportunity, along with a number of other new and emerging technologies. But if there's no or little money getting into this particular area of the market, how is that part of the market going to scale? And how is the cost of the technology going to reduce so that the price can reduce in order that we can hit the net zero targets at all, let alone at a cost competitive price? So from our perspective, the feedback we get from clients is that they understand the difference between avoidance and removal, often after a little bit of help with clarification. But the clients say there's no way that we can use removals; they're just too expensive. And others will say, well, what's biochar? And then those that might understand what it is eventually will say, well, can we trust it? The bottom line is very few people ask for it, and even fewer of them want to pay for it. So there are some things that need to happen in the removals world, in particular, that biochar must assist with, and that is some form of standardization in terms of the issuance standards. We've seen in the previous panel a number of those. They all have a slightly different approach, but hopefully are singing from the same hymn sheet. But if the consumer understands what biochar is and that they can trust it, then we're making big steps in the right direction. And there are.
Sorry to cut you off. I wonder if we can move on, if that's okay. So we're running out of time. Everyone's overrun quite a bit. We've got lots of questions to go through. If that's okay with you.
I guess it has to be, doesn't it? So if
Thank you very much.
My slides, my contribution will hopefully be useful in the Q&A.
It was indeed. Thank you for your time. Can I invite all the other speakers?
I'll do a sales pitch next time. Apologies.
Absolutely. Everyone else can come back on screen, and then we can go through some of the questions that have been stacking up. And Teresa, brilliant. Okay. I guess the first question that we're talking through, all of your different sort of angles of this sort of world is there push or is there pull? Are the markets coming to you looking for biochar projects, or are you putting biochar products onto projects onto your client base? How is this working for you? Does anyone want to answer that?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I can start.
Please, someone.
I mean, at For Lions, we have like both approach. So we have project developers coming to us with the biochar project ideas, and we support them on how to search which standard will be suitable for them, because as we saw, Puro, EBC, Verra has different approaches. And then we promote biochar, or we incorporate biochar into our portfolio that we hand over to the end buyers. So we have around plus 1,500 corporates, and we try to allocate the biochar projects for them, explaining what is biochar, as Luis mentioned as well. Some of them have never heard about it, so that's also why it's important to find the correct partner or the corporate to understand about biochar. And this comes right into what FT say about the insetting approach, because it's maybe easier if the value chain have something related to cocoa or coffee or any waste biomass that you can kind of relate it to the storytelling. So to make it in an easier way, we try just to kind of simplify based on science still, just for them to understand. So, I mean, I will say like biochar producers can just come to us as well, but then on the end buyer, we kind of tell them what is biochar at this point.
Anyone's got a point to that? I mean, are you looking for a certain type of biochar company? Is it a certain type of technology, or is the type of carbon they're producing, how does it go that far in your viewpoint?
I guess I could give a.
Please.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Teresa. Sorry about that.
Well, so each of the different methodologies have different requirements about, the type of biochar that can be used. South Pole is focused on the VCS and CAR methodologies moving forward, though we have worked with and particularly sold credits from Puro and the other standards as well. But what we're seeing is that there will be a focus on biochar that is generated from biomass waste. So there is a list of eligible waste streams that will be able to create biochar that then is eligible for generating these carbon credits. So that is really a priority for us, is finding the right type of biochar that will be eligible. So as Andrea said, there's this initial screening project to make sure that the biochar will be eligible in the carbon credits, and then we work to develop the carbon credits from there.
I can also answer here. So with the criteria we're developing, we are hoping to find projects and which are in a way emitting less during the production phase. Like there is methane emissions if you have low-tech pyrolysis units. So in some cases, the emissions can outweigh the removals. So we definitely want to avoid such projects. And also sustainability of feedstock is extremely important. And we are also looking into how it is applied and if it can be quantified, all the co-benefits and removals.
Thank you. It's good. There's a few questions about additionality, which I know is always a hot topic, as is traceability, but it'd be good to get your perspective on this. This question is quite specific in terms of where you stand on additionality and whether quality parameters exist for good CO2 removals in the same way. Has anyone got a strong opinion on additionality?
No? Comment on that?
Thank you.
No problem. Yes, it's a hot topic, and I think that was not a little bit addressed on the previous panel, but I think we also need to understand what is the baseline of these projects. For example, under Verra methodology that we are developing, we also mentioned that the baseline is like the biomass that will have been left for decay, for example, or the biomass will have been combusted with other purpose rather than energy. In this case, we can also account for the carbon removals in this case of using this waste biomass into the biochar production. And on the additionality topic, we defined waste biomass to biochar conversion or ratio because it was also the available information that there is on the biochar scientific literature, for example. And it was a hot topic as well within the methodology because we were thinking that probably would also be important to understand what is the biochar production and what is the biochar market. But if we are talking about global scale, there is not really this data, and maybe something that IBI could also support us in the development of this data so we can also understand what is the biochar carbon market. And on the 5% is just a little more technical that I will not go into here. It's on Verra methodology requirements. And it's just to standardize the additionality for the project. So what will happen if a project finds or out after some years the 5% is just like covered, for example, or is more? Verra will every 3 years will kind of update, and then it will be mainly focused on which countries are like scaling up highly on the biochar productions, and it will kind of update these values. But at this point, we find out that actually everything is under 0.1%. So we have still a long way for scaling up biochar, and biochar carbon projects can actually do this. So I think it's a good match to access the carbon finance. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And we're taking a financial additionality perspective, so it's a little bit different than the 5%. So instead of looking at any percentages, we just see if it would be profitable, even without the carbon credit revenues, just like in any basic offset project. And if the answer is yes, if there is a market for the biochar, if buyers are willing to pay for buying the tons of actual biochar, then there is no need for carbon credit revenue. But this is not the case at the moment, since the market is just emerging, and biochar per ton is very expensive. So it's expensive for farmers to apply biochar on their fields, and that's why it needs the support at the moment. But maybe it's different in 10 years when all the co-benefits are quantified and when it's just profitable to have biochar applied.
Agreed. I mean, interesting follow question that comes with that. And from a carbon removal sort of cork or credit perspective, even within the VCS, what is the fair price for woody? The price of the carbon itself outside of the price for the offset. Does anyone have a view on that? Because it's just a big question that, within the biochar space for all producers is how much shall I sell it for? What's it actually worth? Anyone have a view on that? It's okay. It's a difficult one to answer. Lewis,
I can go maybe, even though I'm not selling biochar, I'm not producing biochar, but in my perspective, the carbon credit revenue needs to be a bridge. So a project should happen and it should fill the gap which is missing. So if you sell your biochar tons and you still make loss, and then you can have this additional revenue from credits, but it shouldn't be in a way like too high. So in a way you make a lot of profit from the credits. So it should be like a balancing act. So it's still helping, but it's reasonable price and it makes some sense. So it's based on something. It's not based on just throwing numbers in the air and saying, I think you know what I mean. There should be maybe financial analysis behind it, how much it's needed, and so on. For example, scaling.
Absolutely. Very specific question for you, Lewis. What kind of insurance do you think that buyers are looking for in the voluntary market? And particularly, do you see insurance playing a large role in replacing these carbon pools moving forward?
So did you say insurance?
Yes.
Insurance. I couldn't tell you anything about insurance, unfortunately.
I assume talk, but someone very specifically asked that question. Okay, let's move on rather than a flounder on that one. I was going to ask, basically, are there certain criteria or characteristics that the corporates are looking for within wider sort of carbon project portfolios? Andrea, Teresa, I'm sure that you're being approached in that way.
Happy to take that one. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I can start and then for sure, I mean, there is a lot. But what we see mainly is permanence, as mentioned. They want to secure that the investment they are doing, buying a carbon credit, for example, carbon sink is actually created. And they want to understand the logic of permanence. So that's on biochar, I think is important to kind of, for me, at least to standardize this so the end buyer can know what permanence means between the different biochar projects. Co-benefits as well, as mentioned by FT. At the same time, how biochar or the carbon credit from biochar is supporting the co-benefits, depending on which project type you are applying or you are using, for example. Methodologies. I think that's why we are also in this panel about robust and comprehensive methodologies for real carbon GHG accounting. I will on the last panel about the tracking and the monitoring that is especially important in biochar because we need to track from the sourcing with the sustainable biomass available or waste biomass until actually the carbon sink is applied. So for me, for example, personally, I think the biochar needs to be applied in order to create a carbon sink, and it should not stop at the pyrolysis plant, for example. And the third-party validations, if we follow the standards in this case, that you need a verifier and the end buyer can also pick up on the label under VCS or the CCB, the Climate Community Benefits, or Climate Action Reserve, or any other standard as well.
And Trey, something to add?
Sure. I mean, I would just underscore. I think the co are a really important part of all of this. Typically, our buyers are looking for a portfolio of projects. So I saw another question that was been upvoted, kind of asking about the price points as well. So most of our clients will go for not just one project, but a portfolio, depending on how many credits they're buying total, anywhere from 3 to 5 projects, for example. They do that as a way to balance the price. So if biochar is one of the credits they're buying, they might buy some of the slightly more cost-effective, significantly more cost-effective project types as well. So it might be biochar, reforestation, and some sort of energy, renewable energy projects as well, to try and balance those prices. And also reiterate, really additionality and permanence are really key details here. And frankly, that their project isn't going to have any surprises that bring negative press to them, right? So I think having a really robust due diligence process from your carbon project developer is important. And South Pole, as a member of ICROA, I'm not sure if that's an acronym folks have heard, it's the International Carbon Reduction and Offset Alliance. Basically, as a member of ICROA, we commit to primarily buying, selling, and developing credits under these standards that are approved by ICROA. So that includes VCS and CAR, and they all basically set a set of standards for the standards, if you will. And so that those details end up kind of ensuring best practices from the various carbon credits. And so we prioritize selling credits within those standards. And that helps ensure the rigor as well. So that's kind of an extra seal of approval, if you will, that you know you're selling or buying good high quality carbon credits.
Thank you. Jacob, there's a question for you here in terms of when your clients put a request in for a biochar project, where are the gaps between the kind of expectations of those project developers and then the buyer at the other end? How do you play that game in terms of sort of volumes and price expectations and all the sort of parts of a wider project?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, I would say similar to South Pole, what we usually take is a portfolio approach. You wouldn't necessarily, a company wouldn't necessarily come to us expecting to buy everything from one project at a certain price point. They would want to kind of have a balanced portfolio, maybe balancing geographies, vintages, prices, standards, and so on and so forth. And I think when it comes to the new technologies in particular, we see a lot of interest in removals, and we sometimes get requests from things like biochar and CCS. But usually there's a lot of education involved. Usually it's just a very general request. They won't really know the nuances of the technology, and you have to kind of take them by the hand and really introduce them to the different kinds of streams that can exist. Do they want to consider additionality at all? If they want to make a carbon neutral claim, if they aren't interested in the carbon neutral claim, maybe they don't need to think about additionality. They might be thinking about an insetting approach, and then it's more of a geographic specific relationship that they're looking for, rather than a technology specific relationship or a standard specific relationship that they're looking for. So, it really just starts usually with the request. Yeah. The request is quite broad, and then you just dig as deep as they want to go, depending on what they're trying to accomplish and what their criteria are.
Yeah. Lewis, sorry, I think I just caught your hand being raised as I look back down at the screen, but as I cut you off, would you like to have the last word with the last sort of couple of minutes to go?
Thanks. Well, I suppose getting back to the insurance question, what kind of insurance do biochar producers want or need? And actually, it's not an insurance issue; it's a market issue. What project developers want and need is a reliable price, and this, I think, cuts to the problem not only of biochar, that has an extreme version of this, but the voluntary carbon markets in general, which is that there is not a reliable pricing mechanism. There isn't sufficient transparency around the prices that projects are achieving, or around the prices actually that consumers are achieving. And so what biochar could absolutely benefit from is that standardization that I was mentioning, and a robust marketplace from which everyone buys, everyone knows what they're all paying, and everyone knows what everyone else is receiving. And that kind of certainty can allow the financing to come in from those that have the money to spend on that sort of activity, VC funds and banks, possibly as this market matures.
Thank you. And just a question for all of them. I mean, do you think the IBI can help with, the USBI can help with education to get that sort of understanding in the wider marketplace?
Absolutely. And so Vera is probably the dominant VCM issuer, followed by Gold Standard and CAR, I believe. And Vera is a late comer to this particular party, and so it remains to be seen if they will if their standard will dominate in some way. I think there's a lot of small scale projects, so various fees may well be off-putting, and some of the other panelists you had in the previous session may benefit from that. But certainly having as much consistency between the standards, that could be one very important role. And then, of course, suggesting improvements for those standards and areas where cost savings might be achieved too.
Brilliant. Thank you. And thank you all very much for your time today, for your slides and commitment to the biochar world. We appreciate it.
Yes, I'll add my thanks to that. Moderating, and Louis, Jacob, Teresa, Effie, and Andrea, thank you so much for your time. And just to reiterate James's last question there, if any of you have ideas for how IBI can help with this education to the end clients, please let us know. I think that's one of our main functions is how to facilitate that sort of thing. So thanks once again. And coming up next, we have sadly only 3 videos. We thought we'd get about 10 for this next session, but we have 3 different companies from 3 different continents, and the pitch here, we were looking for companies to pitch directly to carbon buyers, removal buyers. And the first one, Caroline, I think that we have lined up is from one of our silver sponsors, Pyreg from Germany. And for those of you that don't know Pyreg, they have been in the business for quite a long time. I don't want to say how many years because I'm sure I would get it wrong. They have predominantly been in Europe. Some of my study tours in the past have been looking at their equipment in Stockholm, Sweden, and then also in Austria. But my understanding is that they are in the US through one of their licensees, Bioforce Tech, but they also, I think, are putting up some installations on the East Coast, where I am, up in Maine, I believe. So, Caroline, are we close to having it ready? Okay, that was great. That might be a tough act to follow. But next up, we have a manufacturer of pyrolysis technology called RTChar, and Bernie Del Campo and his team have been in this space for quite a while. They have a very interesting mobile pyrolysis unit, and we'll see what they have to say. Are we ready, Caroline?
We have been.
Okay. Thank you, RTChar. I wish every company in the biochar space was as forthcoming with that sort of data. I think we'd all like to see that sort of thing. So I appreciate your willingness to share. Our final video today is from a company called New Earth out of Brazil. Caroline?
Thank you.
Hi, all. My sincere apologies. I mixed up a video from tomorrow with New Earth, and they were a very interesting small-scale platform that we didn't have the ability to put on an earlier panel, so they had requested if they could put a video on today. So I thought that might be of interest to everyone. So at the moment, Caroline is trying to rally the last 2 people that are going to be on our final panel, Sampo, who you've already heard from today, and Carl Strua from Oregon Biochar Solutions.
Yeah, Sampo and Carl, if you're there, please just turn on your camera and mic because we are ready for your session. We're a few minutes early, so hopefully you guys are ready. There we go. Thanks, guys. Take it away.
All right. And Carl, I apologize for mispronouncing your name. What we wanted to do for the end of the day is talk to 2 biochar producers that have actually been through this process of getting certified and trading on the carbon markets. So the first person we're going to be hearing from is Sampo, who moderated earlier, because Sampo has probably the most experience with this whole process through Puro, but I believe you've looked at others as well. So if you want to just give us your lessons learned, advice for those looking to come on to the biochar markets, take it away.
Thanks, Kathleen. Yeah, I'm suffering from or recovering from a severe flu, so bear with me. Yeah, I've been in the kind of a biochar realm for all of my professional life, 25 years, and my dog just came in and he's doing something totally distracting me. Sorry about that. Yeah, in the biochar scene for a very long time, since 1996, 1995, and always really interested in carbon removal and very aware of climate change. I remember it was 1888. I was probably 10 years old at the time when I kind of first registered it. And it's been on my mind since. And I used to say that biochar makes a great carrier for CO2 or a vehicle for CO2 removal. And you know, I would get funny looks or you know, even people would even roll their eyes because it was out of context at the time. But of course, now it makes a lot of sense. And so we kind of set out systematically, you know, towards the CO2 market 3.5 years ago, roughly. Carbofex, my company, we joined Puro.earth marketplace in the very beginning, and we were part of crafting the methodology at Puro as they kind of first biochar you know, based CO2 removal company. And our kind of focus is really on the CO2 removal, and we've been really pushing all kinds of biochar applications hard for a long time. But I think there's just like too much to do for one company, and we now kind of focus on the technology and CO2 removal projects, and we develop the applications together with our partners. And I think one of the things when we set out to create this methodology was that one of the ideas was that it has to be transparent, it has to be verifiable. You know, we have to be able to quantify it and verify it both. And so it has to be based on third-party verification, and it has to be based on an established mass and energy balance. And there's a lot of science in it, but you have to make it kind of waterproof in a way, so that anybody from outside can come and audit our books and actually verify that this is what has been done, and everything's you know, is you know, kept track. So we started out by you know, creating a mass and energy balance, and of course an LCA, which is kind of the mass and energy balance of the entire company or the product. And in about 3 years ago, I would say, very close to 3 years ago, we sold the first CO2 removal certificates, corks, through Puro.earth. And at that time, it was an auction, and we would get maybe 30 to 50 euros, 50 on a good day, but typically 35, and there was an oversupply and there was very little interest. But then the IPCC report came, and a few other things, Greta Thunberg and some individuals also brought attention to this subject, and I think you know, things have really taken off since. Now the last trade we made, it was at 120 euros CO2 ton CO2, and we have a kind of a net number of 3.2. So for every kilogram of biochar, we net remove 3.2 kilograms of CO2, and the gross number is 3.4. So it's a very high carbon content biochar, around 93-94% typically. And we use wood as a feedstock, and we only use thinnings, wood thinnings from managed small forests, young forests. So thinnings are kind of a byproduct of young forests, and they are kind of outside of the double counting kind of realm, or because the state of Finland basically already calculates how much the forests absorb CO2 every year, and we use that in our kind of national math to come up with a net emission of CO2. So anything that is accumulating in the kind of wood stock is included already in the Finnish government or the state, but the thinnings are a kind of byproduct of forest management, so they are removed so that faster growing trees and larger trees can develop further and become timber, proper timber. And and they are also a kind of an economic challenge for forest owners, since they are not profitable for the forest owner, and the government has come up with all kinds of incentive schemes to subsidize or incentivize the thinning of young forests, and currently we are about 2 million hectares behind. So if we look at our feedstock supply and 2 million hectares, typically we would get I would say 40-50 cubic meters per hectare. So there we have a kind of feedstock supply of 80 to 90 million cubic meters of wood thinnings, and we can access quite easily in the short term and at very high quantity. And we pay a slightly higher price than is normally paid for them, so that kind of puts it over the threshold, and instead of just knocking it over and leaving to rot in the forest owners actually pay a contractor to gather the wood and take it to a roadside where we'll load it on a truck and take it to our factory. So we're kind of really aware on the kind of feedstock things, and it's all certified. At the moment we are under PEFC, but we have also been looking into the FSC, and at the moment most of the forest owners are under PEFC, but FSC is making its way, but Finland has kind of have a long established PEFC system in place, so a lot of the operators here are reluctant to change, which is not rare, I guess, anywhere. So that's what we do, and of course we are going to expand our operations. At the moment we're planning for a 15 times larger plant, and we are familiar with all of the marketplaces, and we have been studying the VCS methodology and quite closely, and we keep an eye on the other methodologies as well. We also have our own standpoint on additionality, for example. I think there are three kinds. One is financial additionality, like came out with FDMIA, that if it kind of triggers the project or makes it viable, then you could say that there is financial additionality with the cork revenues or the pre-cork funding, or the carbon future funding, whichever you want to call it. And the and then you could also look at the raw material, if it's something that is not being utilized at the moment, and it gets utilized or becomes gets used because of the activity, then that's also additional from a climate perspective. And then you can look at the kind of operations and the revenue streams, and obviously if let's say 90% of the revenues come from elsewhere, then one could ask if this is additional, and it's a good question, but I think additionality is something that is a loose term and a flexible term and a broad term, so we could have a lot of views on that, and it's still I think it's worth making biochar products happen, even they would be profitable, because they do de facto remove carbon from the atmosphere. So I think the most important thing we should be looking at is climate additionality. So does it actually revert a flow of carbon from somewhere that is permanently stored and away from the cycle? I think you want to take the talking stick, Kathleen.
Well, just are there any lessons learned from this whole process of getting on the carbon markets that you want to just touch on?
Well, I think we did it pretty good in the first run, so there hasn't been like really negatives that have come out. I have been kind of observing the market, and it is becoming more aware and more conscious that not all carbon removals are equal, that there are actually the concept of additionality is one, but then the permanence and does additional harm or does additional good kind of aspects to it. So I think we kind of have to keep an eye on those, and of course the market will decide a lot of things, and whether all of these things will ultimately matter, we will see. I think as long as we're in a crunch and there's a scarcity, then it will matter less. But if supplies become abundant, then you will have to be able to compete. You will have to compete somehow, and but yeah, lessons learned. I guess it has to be rigid. It has to be verifiable, and it is now something that is becoming like into broader discussion, and I think it's good, but at the same time I think it's funny that somebody's actually paid something for carbon removal services without it being third-party verified. I mean, I wouldn't have, and it's one of those things that is like a very easy to you got to have your ethics in place, and the moral code has to be there, and still it's amazing.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, thanks, Sampo. I think I'll give Carl a chance and then bring you back up if there are any questions. So Carl, as I said, is coming from the other part of the world, from Oregon Biochar Solutions. They went through a slightly different process for getting onto the markets, which I'll let him walk through.
Thanks, Kathleen. So yeah, I started at Oregon Biochar Solutions in 2017, and in 2018 started looking a little bit into the carbon markets. I didn't find too much that was readily available for us at that time, but kept an eye on it. And in June of 2020, Jega Environmental introduced us to Puro Earth, and we started having conversations with them. We started working very actively on the process in 2021, January, February, and the process went fairly smoothly. This company is fairly dedicated to data gathering and tracking. So we track every single load of feedstock that comes into our facility. We do everything from a moisture test to in some cases, we'll actually do a BTU test on the feedstock. And there are dozens and dozens of other metrics that we look at. So in terms of gathering all the data for this, we had the majority of it already set up for other reasons. In terms of costs, the LCA was the most costly portion of this. We already had an LCA, but it was very broad scoped. It did not drill into some of the more de minimis, I guess you could say, emissions, such as the natural gas that's used for a couple hours to start up the plant, things like that. So the new LCA was expensive, but very much worth getting, both for the purposes of carbon credits and for understanding our overall footprint. There was a bit of time required from a number of different people here at our facility to consolidate all that data and send it over. But as I mentioned before, it was most of the data is already gathered and tracked, and we already do ongoing testing of our product for various aspects. So a lot of that data was already being gathered as well by third-party labs. Let's see. So as far as the revenue that we get from this, Jaka and Pura both work off of a percentage, but we still receive over 80% of the total revenue, which is quite nice. It has allowed us to lower the cost of production, or pass the savings on to our customers, and hopefully this will equate a larger demand for biochar in the future. And I guess as far as problems, there weren't a whole lot. It was mainly just going through all of our data and kind of gathering it, quantifying it, making sure there were no errors in it, and making sure that we had our I's dotted and T's crossed. That's basically how it went for us.
Sampo, if you could join us once again, that would be great. A couple of things. Well, the first question, Carl, you already answered, but maybe Sampo, I think you might have a different viewpoint on this. I was going to ask how being on the carbon markets has changed your business prospects, and specifically the pricing of biochar. So,
Well,
go ahead.
yeah, it's a good question. But my answer may be funny because for me, like one of the main things to be in biochar is about CO2 removal. So I'm kind of it is finally here. You know, that's all I can say. So no, it has changed everything. Of course, I mean it's still very hard to build a growth story on biochar because the market really isn't there that big time. And we're thinking about at the same time, you know, people are desperately looking for ways to remove CO2. So there's a funny equation that kind of needs to meet somehow. And right now, you know, it kind of needs that there is a market for biochar, you know, to be able to kind of, you know, kick it up big time, or you know, then, you know, dump the biochar in the sea and get paid, you know, for just for the CO2 removal service or something like that. But you know, for the time being, I guess, well, I get asked the question that what is holding us back, or what is the biggest obstacle? And there's no technical obstacle. There's no like it's just the market, you know, isn't quite there yet. We see it's clear that it will be there. It's going to take about 3 to 5 years, and we see a lot of these huge mega applications, you know, for biochar, like soil applications in all kinds of forms, and then construction materials like we've looked at here, and you know, so many other things. So it's just, you know, tooth and nail till then.
I would agree. Actually, the most commonly asked question I get from people that are on the biochar carbon markets is, you know, I still have to sell my biochar no matter what the price is, and we want to scale fast, but we need to have a market for it. So I totally agree.
Yeah, there's a enormous need for biochar in a lot of different applications, but unfortunately, need never equates demand. So you have to turn that need into a demand through either marketing or research development.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that going on right now. It's really exciting to see. And for those of you that don't know, I'm in my home office right now, and this is my biochar wall behind me. So I have a good 10 pounds of biochar in that wall.
Wow.
And I have about a ton of it in my septic system. So I'm trying to do a proof of concept there. One question that's been asked in a couple of panels, but I'm going to ask you very specifically, is what is the actual cost of doing the LCA's, cost of certification, lab testing, stuff like that? And at what point did it make sense from a production versus cost of getting on these markets. If you're making 10,000 tons a year, does it make sense? If you're making 1,000 tons a year, I'm sure you do the economics versus the cost of entry.
Should I go first?
Please.
Well, it depends on how much groundwork you've done. If you haven't established a mass and energy balance for your system, then obviously you're going to have much more work to do, and you're going to have to kind of either prove that through operations, so that you can show production statistics where you buy this much feedstock and you get put out this much biochar and this much heat and whatnot. And then, it's derived from there, or then you do what is called a lab mass and energy balance, where you run your system for, let's say, at least a day, preferably 3 days, and measure all the inputs and measure all the outputs. And it's a lot of work in there, and a lot of people needed to measure everything, all the time. So that's one. But then if you're established, then it can be just derived from your operations. You're going to need, it's expanding all the time. We just added a flue gas analysis to our kind of, verification, because most of biochar systems burn something somewhere. And if there's a lot of methane that results from that combustion, then you're not doing really good. You're nullifying all the benefits that you're creating by making the biochar, by emitting too much methane, at least for the first 20, 30 years or so. So the LCA is one. That was about, I would say, to go with the LCA, you're going to need a lot of lab analysis once again. And as we were already in the EBC certification, that was a big thing for us. It opened up the Swedish market for us. We were really early at the time. So that we get most of the data from there. And then the LCA is derived from our operations and the data from the EBC analysis, and all the other operations, like how much energy and other inputs we use. So I would say for us, the cost of renewal is about 10,000 years a year, maybe $11,000, $12,000. But if you have to start from scratch and you have a big system, then you can have much more cost. I would say 20,000, 30,000 euros initially, easily. Just and excluding any platform related costs, if there are. Basically, these are also platform related costs, because most platforms will require you to have all this data available and third party verified. So they are actually probably going to issue their own auditor, on top of the EBC audit that's already done. Like, we've been going under a yearly audit that just kind of renew and verify our numbers every time and see which way we've been going. So, but just the flue gas analysis was 3,000 euros so it kind of adds up. So now if we have to do that every year, we're up to about 13,000 euros. But I hope it's a very stable process and a very stable system. It's like that from, year to year. So I don't, anticipate. We also do in-house flue gas measurements, so we know we are, where we are on that. And so, but there are some costs. So you have to be at some level to justify that cost. But and as the scale goes up, you may need to go through even more platforms, to reach the volumes that you're looking for. So, so you could have multiple costs.
Okay, great. Thanks for that thorough explanation. Carl, anything to add?
Not really. I'd say it cost us in total less than $15,000 US dollars. But as Sampo mentioned, there's a lot of data that needs to be collected for this. We just happen to already be collecting that for other reasons. So for example, all of our stack emissions are monitored 24/7 by the Department of Environmental Quality. So they're getting that data on demand, and we store all of that data on site as well. All the feedstock, we require we have the certifications for all of our sustainable feedstock producers on hand, and then for the I guess for the lab analysis side of things, we're constantly sending out samples for analysis, not to necessarily ensure quality, but we always have new customers coming that would like a very specific lab test done to answer a question as to whether our product will work in one project or another. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. There was one question in the chat about how far you have to track or account for the different feedstock through biochar production. And since you're both on the Puro marketplace, I think it's just a factory gate, which is different for some of the other marketplaces. But correct me if I'm wrong there.
So how far do we have to trace the feedstock, you mean?
Yeah, and the biochar. Do you have to have some sort of verification that it is being used for soil purposes or some carbon preserving purpose versus as charcoal? Is that correct?
We do, yeah. Yeah, we have to make sure that it's not being combusted.
Yeah, we actually include a clause in all of the sales contracts that and there's also like instructions on proper disposal of the product if ever that should happen, that it should not be put in the garbage bin, because it may end up in the incinerator plant at some point. So, but that's really marginal, like homeowners that use it for flower pots and that kind of thing. So that's tiny fraction. But the yes, there is a we follow the like the LCA. With us, it goes all the way into the forest, and in this case, because the thinnings are already felled, but they are not collected, we include the collection emissions and then the transport from the forest to our factory, and then it's only sold to clients and applications that qualify the criteria for CO2 removal or carbon sink. But the traceability is something that like we want to enhance a little bit, so that we could actually know for sure which batch where it physically is located ultimately. So there are different ways of doing that, and we're looking into those.
Great. Well, I think we may have exhausted folks today because nobody's putting questions in the chat. But I had one final question, which is about where you see the most interest coming from the buyer side. We heard on previous panels that a lot of the buyers looking for carbon removal have never heard of biochar, but I think that's starting to change. And I'd like to hear your perspectives. If you have direct contact with them, or if you have a broker, if you hear who's looking at biochar, who's interested at this stage.
Yeah, Carl, please go ahead.
So I would say that the most interest that we are getting are from farms that are impacted by the drought or nutrient issues, with the close follower being both passive and active stormwater filtration. So with passive being, groundwater infiltration basins, and active being stormwater biochar medias that are developed to store specific contaminants, E. coli, heavy metals, and other unwanted materials out of those streams. So I would say with agriculture, it's the drought prevention and the probably nutrient retention would be the top two, and then the next one would be the stormwater markets, followed by the remediation markets.
But what about on the buyers of the carbon removal credit side? Do you have?
Oh, on the buyers of the, yeah, I would say large tech and finance customers, mostly in Europe, North America, Australia, and New Zealand.
All right, Sampo.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we have the same. We have a couple of let's say smaller what do you call it, distributors, but mostly we sell to the to the big tech companies that they have a lavish budget for carbon removal, but also are not super carbon intensive. So they do have the ability to pay more than say cement or steel companies for their CO2 removal because obvious reasons. And we've been fortunately like well sold out for a long time because we were so early in the market, and we've been quite established already. We've removed over 3,000 tons, probably closer to 4,000 now since we started. Counting, I mean, we've removed a lot before that, but there's a cutoff in late 2018 when we start counting. And so yeah, it's mostly to those companies, but there's a huge amount of interest from a lot of big companies that are all looking for their net zero goals. So it could be that it's with food companies or people in the kind of food like fertilizer or agrochemicals, or it could be the food producers themselves, or it could be an industrial company trying to reduce the carbon footprint of their product and using the biochar as a component of some sort. If that product could be concrete or something else. And we're also yeah, that's what we use the biochar in. But at the moment, the most that we sell goes into Sweden and into structural growing media, like is used in Stockholm, for example, and in major Swedish cities. That's really the kind of engine for biochar demand in Northern Europe right now. And but we see a lot of interesting things coming. There's the like Sweden is a steel giant, and the steel industry is going through a transformation. And instead of burning 450 tons of carbon per or 450 kilograms per ton of steel, they only need 30 kilograms of high-grade biochar, and they actually need fairly high biochar. And the carbon won't be burnt and released to the atmosphere. It will actually be kind of alloyed into the steel. So it makes it very interesting. Like, steel is an alloy of iron and carbon, and typically has about 2% carbon in it. And at the same time,
steel is recognized as a carbon preserving thing by any of the markets yet?
Well, it is not happening anywhere yet. So it's going to take until 2025 before the hydrogen reduced sponge iron becomes before the first major plant starts. But it's only going to start from there, and for the next 10 years, we're going to see a lot of steel mills converted into this new carbon neutral technology. So, but they're really picky, in a lot of ways, and they need very high spec carbon. So that's also a difficult equation to meet because you need to have high carbon content. Otherwise, the carbon will be volatilized as soon as you put it in the melting pot, with the iron. But
right.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. Well, thank you so much. We're coming to the end. Is there something else you wanted to say, Carl?
Yeah, I just had 2 comments. So one, we still have some carbon credits left for the year. So we did start out with a fairly large supply, but the second one was on the carbon markets coming up. It'll be interesting to see what happens as not only the steel industries, but also the water filtration industries shift over to renewable-based carbons. So that's going to be the 2 places I think to look at, because there's a lot of coal-based carbon getting used in drinking water filtration. So that's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah, for sure.
Indeed. Yep. Okay, well, thank you both very much for wrapping it up today. I think, Caroline, we have another hour-long networking break for those that want to stick around and schmooze a little bit.
Yep, that's correct. So we'll be heading to our networking, our final networking break of the day now. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time, 11:30 Eastern, which is 16:30 UTC. And we will see you then for our tar tank based sessions, but we'll head into networking now. Thanks everyone for joining today.
Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you.